Now is the time in our service where we take an offering. We know it is the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to thrive and gather. For those attending in person, we will pass a collection plate. Please use the envelope you'll find in the pew and write your name and indicate if your offering is part of your pledge or a donation. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through our PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. Our offerings will be greatly received.
The wisdom of the great Chief Seattle reminds us all things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth, befalls the children of the earth. All things share the same breath. The beast, the tree, the man, the air shares its spirit with all the life it supports. We do not need the web of life, we are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. This we know.
All things are connected, for we share the same breath. All things are connected, the earth all things are connected. All things are connected.
Treat the earth well, it was not given to you by your parents. It was belongs to you by your children. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. All things are connected. Only after the last tree has been cut down. Only after the last river has been cut. Only after the last fish has been caught. Only then will we find money cannot be eaten. All things are connected.
Now turn in your great hymnal, number 298. Wait now, my senses. 298. Please rise and sing out heartfully. When now my senses fall, the power of being alone. When your creation My feet reach out to the join the pitch for the ground, while so I got true. Oh, never be done with the strong one. Voice in a sound song,
This reading is from an article by Mary Anais Heglar in The Nation magazine. I've written before about the importance of grief in the face of an existential crisis. People can't fix problems if they don't confront them. We have to let people mourn so they can come out on the other side. Perhaps it's time to stop worrying about giving people hope and to start letting people grieve. Around 2018, the concept of climate grief jumped out from academic circles and into the mainstream. And we've gotten better at talking about it as a separate and special kind of grief. But Americans especially have not gotten better at processing. I never want to be the person who can look at so much suffering in the world and feel fine. It hurts because it's supposed to. Turning off the pain would mean turning off my humanity, and I just can't do that. Climate grief is not an illness to cure. It's a condition. We will have to live with it. But then, isn't all grief?
You guys can hear me? When Ruth asked me to work with her on this service, grief is something people don't want to lean into, you know? Grief is something that people want to avoid. I think that's very true of Americans. And confronting it is painful, and it's hard to stay in that space without looking towards the other side. I think if you fully feel the grief that we're going to encounter, the human suffering that's, in our immediate and distant future, it's very hard to stay there. And that is why community is so important, because grief can make people really feel alone. We grieve the loss of a world that seems so stable, so predictable, familiar. We grieve the loss of species that are disappearing at an alarming rate, too numerous to name. The polar bears, the coral reefs, the rainforests, they're being lost to climate change. And of course, we grieve the loss of our sense of security, familiarity, the threat of rising sea levels, the acidification of the ocean, extreme weather events, and food shortages, which are happening now, hang heavy on us. But I think the worst part of grief is a loss of hopefulness, a loss of anticipation in the future, and thinking of, our children, the children of this world, and what they're going to inherit. It's losing the world that we have, but the one that we hope for. And this is familiar to a lot of us here because of Hurricane Sandy. This is concrete. This is not abstract for us. It's a close reminder of the consequences of climate change. The storm surge, it inundated neighborhoods. It destroyed homes. It claimed lives. More lives were lost in the Staten Island community than anywhere in our immediate area because of the storm. And for those who survived, the period afterwards was a profound period of disruption and loss. I remember volunteering in the aftermath. First in Coney Island, doling out diapers to mothers in multi-story public housing, and you couldn't give them a lot. You had to open up the box and just give them a few, like one and a half days worth of diapers. And the elevators didn't work in those buildings. So like 17-story public housing, and senior citizens were trapped on upper floors with no way to get out. And that lasted a really long time. I remember we delivered meals to volunteers here on Staten Island. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. We delivered meals to the volunteers who were working around the clock trying to secure, safety and security for the people who had lost homes. And we went to the South Shore and seeing entire contents of someone's home piled up in front of what was basically ruins, covered in mud, the work of someone's entire life. That's a concrete climate grief. There was disorientation. Their homes, their neighborhoods, their sense of security were shattered by nature, and it felt overwhelming and unjust. And it's a visceral reminder to all of us who didn't necessarily lose something, how fragile everything could be, even like a nice middle-class home in a nice neighborhood. There are also stories, of course, of mutual aid and community. When people came together, when they banded together to rebuild, to volunteer, to provide assistance. We're not alone in our grief. Because we all live on this world, we're going to share the fate of the world. But in the community, you can find solace and strength, and you can find inspiration. We can think of our neighbors in Queens. This is much more recent. A lot of people lost their lives trapped in flooded basements. And we can think of something that everyone experienced here in the Eastern Seaboard, when our sky was filled with the smoke of another country's wildfires, not even our own country. So where I go with grief often, when I feel sad about the state of the world, and I don't know if we should do this, but this is where I go, which is anger. I go to anger, and that's a way for people to process grief and maybe push grief away. But anger. Grief is a feeling, and anger is energy, not just a feeling. So we can channel that rage. We can channel it. We can channel it here at home. We can demand our leaders take bold action to address this. And we can unite as a people. And we can demand a better future for ourselves and for generations to come. We cannot let despair paralyze us. So, because I want to run away from grief, I'm going to come around to some hope. Because there is hope. I think it's true we need to acknowledge the feeling of grief. And if we stay with it, we have to know that there's someplace that we can go. So here's the hope. I need to believe that these problems are truly solvable. And sometimes what goes with grief is the sense of apathy. And I want to tell you that apathy is a liar. Apathy is a liar. The fossil fuel industry loves apathy because that means they won. So don't let grief become apathy, because apathy is a liar. So I want to give you some hope. New York City is on the forefront of climate resilient projects. And here's small examples of projects. There's the Resilient Coastal Infrastructure Project. This involves the construction of seawalls, floodgates. And you can go to the South Shore and see some impact of that after Hurricane Sandy. There's the New York Cool Streets Initiative. And this initiative aims to reduce urban heat islands by planting trees, green roofs, and reflective surfaces. I just want to reiterate that what will help us in our grief is realizing these are problems that are solvable. It's not inevitable. So here, the federal program, the Inflation Reduction Act, it has goals to reduce greenhouse gases by 1 billion tons by 2030. It sets the goal that 80% of our energy production has to be non-fossil fuel derived. That means the country by 2030. And the funds for EPA's greenhouse gas program, 2/3 of it are flowing to low-income communities, which we know often bear the brunt of most climate change effects. And I want you guys to be aware of New York State Senate Bill S2129A. And that's a climate change superfund bill. It was passed by the Assembly and the Senate, and it only needs the governor's signature. So you can call her and ask her to do that. I don't know if she will, but we can definitely pressure her to do that. And what that does is for industries that have caused climate effects, they are partially financially responsible for rebuilding it in a climate neutral way. So that puts the onus on them to give their money, which, they made a lot of wealth about destroying the planet. So we take some of that back so we can save it. And there's lots of efforts and, there's lots of efforts going on. So I just wanted to point out some of those do exist because they're real and concrete too. If apathy is a liar, then action is the truth. We can continue to protest and demand changes. This week is a great time to do it because, the UN climate conference starts on the 24th. And climate grief hurts your soul. So I want to make some practical suggestions about giving your heart a little rest in this when it's breaking over this issue. I have 2 Instagram follows. It's called, one of them is It's the Garbage Queen, and the other is Sam Bentley. And they give good climate news. And we need to hear it. We can't live constantly in a state of despair. And on another personal note, if you guys are into apps or meditation, a lot of them are pay, but there's a free one called Healthy Mind. And I've done the other meditation apps. And this one, it's about personal growth, sure, but it's a focus on what you can offer others and what you can do for the world. And the world needs us and we need the world. So because I'm an American and I want to get on the other side of grief, I'm going to close this service with an intention for all of us, for myself. May we cultivate compassion for all beings, both human and non-human, who are suffering the effects of climate change. May we find strength and resilience in the face of adversity. And may we work together to create a more just and sustainable world for all. Thank you. Please join us in singing hymn 1064 in your teal hymnal. Favorites. I feel no motion, standing up these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still one drop that heart can say. I've been sailing all my life, never the one universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my home. Some I sail and move my mother, as I walk the starry sea. Over the edge and wonder, casting questions into the deep. Drifting with my ship's companions, all we can pilgrim souls, making our way by the lights of the heavens in our beautiful blue. I give thanks to the waves are rolling me, and the great winds urging me on. Read the infinite sea before me, sing a song, my sailor song. I was born on the valleys, never longer nor more have I known. The water universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my new home. I invite you to join me extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in the order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again. I'll give you some closing words from Rachel Carson of Silent Spring. Those who contemplate the beauty of the earth find reserves of strength that will endure as long as life lasts. There is something infinitely healing in the repeated refrains of nature, the assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. In nature, nothing exists alone.